adverse childhood experiences, which are abuse, sexual, physical, emotional, neglect, emotional and physical, and household dysfunction. 1 in 5 kids in Australia has 3 or more of those. And if we don't do better, they'll become those men.
Hello, old chaps, and welcome to the Academy of Imperfection, where experts in their field share their wisdom on the subject of imperfection. Today, we welcome back paediatric wizard, Dr. Billy Garvey. So bang your mash and join students Hugh, Ryan, and Josh for the Academy of Imperfection.
Well, when we first had Billy Garvey on this podcast, the crowd went wild and everyone was like, get him on again, get him on again. And we were like, wait. And then like a year passed and like, come on, get on Billy Garvey again. We're like, wait. And we said that for 3 years. And here he is, Billy Garvey, back again.
What an intro. Thank you. That's really nice to hear. I mean, there is no crowd here, but I believe you anyway.
The crowd did go wild. You can't hear them, but they're going wild now.
Yeah, they're going wild wherever they are in this very moment, walking around.
My mate Horse is going extra wild because your podcast is his favourite podcast.
Oh, wow.
Pop culture parenting.
Yeah.
Is going so well.
Yeah, well, I have the 3 of you to thank because, it was pretty soon after I was on this the first time that I was like, God, my voice sounds good through a microphone and headphones. And so I was like, I'll go and do this. But, the real reason that pop culture parenting exists is because our clinic wait list is so long and I just want to pull my hair out because I just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And parents go, wow, that's a cool way of explaining that.
I think when you were first on the podcast, I said your waiting list was like 3 years. I think it's 7 years now. I think Billy's like a private school. Like you put your child's name down before you have the child.
Yeah, you put your name down at birth, and then when you get your super, you can see Billy.
Yeah. God, so no, it's great, and that's essentially without this is going to sound like just a very bad plug, but yeah, that's the book as well.
10 things I wish I knew about your child's mental health. Is that?
Yes, bang.
Yeah. So, if you're listening right now and you're not sure of Billy, so Dr. Billy Garvey is a senior specialist of paediatric development at a hospital that we won't name. Let's just say it's very big and it's Melbourne and it's quite regal. I think we can probably.
It wears a crown. There's a big crown on the top of the building. Cost a fortune, but worth it.
But you've been in developmental paediatrics for 20 years now.
Yeah.
You've seen it all. You've seen everything, and I jokingly say the waiting list is 7 years. It's probably not quite that, but there is a very long waiting list to see you. And I remember that was kind of the premise when we first got you on the podcast, was just that so much of the stuff that you say to families, you kind of wish that you were yelling it out to a much bigger audience. And so that was kind of the first time around. Slightly different this time. We did an episode earlier this season on men's violence towards women. And I remember we were touring our show in Brisbane and you were our special guest on stage, which was great. And the topic just came up and I'm listening to you speaking, thinking, it's been really nice to, I got security guard outside Coles gave me his opinion on our episode and the topic. Yeah. And his opinion is very valid, but I thought, gosh, we've got someone, we're friends with Billy Garvey. It would be great to chat to you about this topic. Someone who works like at the coalface, like you're there, you're working with young kids and developmental paediatrics is your specialty. So what a great person to chat to on the topic of masculinity, toxic masculinity, the way boys interact in the world. Yeah. The reason that, some boys turn out to be people who might perpetrate violence and other boys don't. We thought you'd be the perfect person to talk to about this. So go.
Yeah. It's a huge privilege. Yeah, because we spoke about that and, I'm really passionate about this for lots of different reasons. It'll probably come up, some vulnerability through my childhood and things like that and what I witnessed. But I meet these kids in clinic and I hear these horrific stories about things that happen, violence against women around the world is awful. And I've got a little daughter who means more to me than anything else in the world. And
more than your son?
Well, but it's really interesting because it's a slightly different topic, but my son's just turned 1 and I'm like starting to really bond with him now. But when my daughter was born, I didn't instantly bond to her, and parents don't talk about that enough. They talk about like the moment I saw my child, I was instantly connected with them. And I remember feeling like there was something wrong with me, despite having worked with
Wow.
kids for over 20 years. For months, I didn't connect with Yvette, my daughter. Now, I am more connected to her than I am her amazing mum. And it's part of it is because she's got a sensitive temperament and she's a fiery little redhead. And I'm kind of a fiery little redhead, you know, and our temperament sticks. It stays with us for life. We can pick it up from about the first birthday, a little bit before the temperament of a kid, and they'll always be like that. And it comes to it. Some of the violent men out there are still little sensitive boys that have never been given the support and the skills they need to succeed in how they treat women, how they treat others. And that's the work that I do. I catch these kids, and it's a beautiful privilege to get to catch them, because none of those men that are doing these things were born with that being their destiny. Also, the four of us are no better than them. If we'd had the same, you know, genetic build when we were born and then the same environment we'd come up in, we would be doing the same thing. And we need to be careful that we don't look at just punishments and consequences, especially for the teens, because it teaches them nothing. All it teaches them actually is you're not a part of our group, you're not a part of our community, you are inferior to us, and we leave them out in the cold.
Pushes them further away.
Yeah, it pushes them further away. And I have this huge privilege where I get to meet those kids. I hear about them first, how aggressive they are, how violent they are. I mean, I'm talking as well about preschool kids. And sometimes, every so often, I fall for it. I'll have heard about this kid and other people refuse to see him because of how violent he is. And then I'll see him walking down the corridor at the hospital, come in my room, and I forget about all that stuff. And he's just a little kid. He's a little kid that comes in that's heard how bad he is for years and years and years. And often he's lacking skills. And I can help figure out what skills he's lacking and then find ways to teach him that, whether it's empathy, understanding, perspective taking, often emotional regulation. Like, we're probably going to talk about that. One of the biggest problems with men and what we expect men to be is that they hold their feelings down. They don't display emotions, you know. And my partner Annalise is like phenomenal, and she struggles to relate to Evie because she's not sensitive, you know. She's really calm and she does that really well. She's just, you know, an obstetrics doctor, and she needs those skills for her work, and that's naturally how she is. And she struggles to relate to her. But Yvette, before she was 3, she's 3 now, was in the car, and I was driving, Annalise was driving, and I was sitting there, and Evie's like, I want to be a boy. And Annalise is like, how come? And Evie's like, boys don't cry. She's not even 3.
Whoa.
It's not like some amazing language thing. She's learnt that already, and we know that. By 2 years of age, kids will be able to distinguish between the genders. And Annalise, jokingly, was like, your dad cries all the time. And I was like, oh, be careful, because you're actually reinforcing that stereotype that I shouldn't be someone who cries because I'm a man. You know, and so
So she wasn't saying it like in a really positive way, like
no, she was kind of like, your dad cries, because I do cry all the time.
Yeah.
Like I cried twice in one day recently.
What's going on here? Boys don't cry.
Boys don't cry.
This is
Well, yeah,
weird.
boys don't cry, and boys will be boys.
Yeah.
Be really careful about that stuff, because boys, you know, when we talk about boys will be boys, it's often to, you know, give them a pass for being aggressive or hostile or something like that. And I really struggle with this. Like I frequently am on a playground watching Evie step aside because a boy's about to push past her on the slide, or a boy's about to walk up and take a ball off her, and now she just hands the ball over when a boy comes near her because she's so used to it. Doesn't do that if a girl comes near her.
right, okay.
And that's a developmental difference between boys and girls, that, you know, boys are very good at being assertive. They're not very good at being compassionate and understanding, especially in those early years of life, those preschool years. And we know that they're also more vulnerable to role modeling, you know, aggression and seeing that. And so that's the hard thing that, you know, we have, you know, especially us that are raising boys, is that how do we teach them better skills and know where that vulnerability is? And yeah, I truly believe that the issue of what's happening in the world is, it's my responsibility in how I raise Charlie, my son, to do this more than it is in how I raise Yvette. You know, I can teach Yvette to be careful and all of that stuff, but the way we solve this is how men raise boys.
Are you like with having a son, I guess having a son or a daughter, but having a son, like sort of what you're just saying there, do you feel an extra pressure or like responsibility to make sure that the son that you put into the world is responsible and has the knowledge and respectful and
Yeah, I definitely do. I definitely do, because we know it comes more naturally. It's the way we are about girls, but they're also more likely to play very early on in like caring roles with dolls and stuff like that. And then we're much better at girls having diverse levels of play. Like they can play with dolls and play house and nurse and all that stuff, but they can also do sports, whereas we're much more restrictive with boys. Like sports and wrestling and, kicking a ball and throwing a ball and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's hard, but I also see the consequences of that in clinic, So that's a lot of the boys that I see who are bullies, who are being bullied, who have low self-esteem, or their aspirational goal is to be more physical, to be bigger, to be stronger, is hard, because I know that the actual determinant of what their adult mental health will be like, their social connection, even their income, their academic process, is what their social and emotional development is like. But we don't really value that as a society. Like, kindness, sensitivity, we don't value that in men. And so none of these boys have got that as their North Star.
Can I'm kind of interested, and maybe this is not worth getting bogged down in and maybe not a worthwhile path to go down, but in terms of like if your own kid is struggling with something versus a kid who comes into clinic, is there a vast difference between how you're able to not treat them, you don't treat your own kid, engage with them, I guess? I don't know. Like, is there I'm just asking, like, is there the separation where it's like, it's not your child? Is that a different experience? I mean, obviously you love your child more than those children, but do you get what I'm sort of?
I use a lot of the same techniques, I think, if that's what you mean. Like every kid and actually every parent I meet, I'm trying to connect with them and make them feel good about themselves. But I have to do it genuinely. I have to find something, like it's easy with the three of you. Like I feel like I have a connection to the three of you because I know about qualities you have that are actually what we're talking about. It's not how tough you are or how good you are at running and stuff. It's, the qualities about how sensitive and kind and generous and altruistic you are.
Hugh has taken issue with that. He does want you to know how good he is at running.
Yeah.
I'll see some videos later.
Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? Like I love running too, and that's the vulnerability in me, is that I actually put more effort into my athletic pursuits than I do often into my mental health pursuits. Like they're tied, don't get me wrong. But the interesting thing about men and raising boys is that we emphasize so much the physicality and things like that. And we're like that too. Like, a lot of us spend a lot of time in like golfing and four-wheel driving and fishing and stuff, but we care way more about our kids, yet we don't think about it and pursue it and read about it and practice it. You know what I mean? We just go, she'll be right. And, the reality is she will be right is wrong. Like, that's why I push back against this, like, latchkey kid, free-range parenting. We're on top of our kids too much now because so many of them are failing. And we know that those kids who don't have that support and scaffolded opportunities
So
struggle.
can you say that again? What do you push back against? The latch?
Oh, yeah, the latch. I don't know if you heard of latchkey kids. It actually came out of World War II, essentially, when all the men went off to war and then the women had to go into factories and work, and all these kids were just like running around on their own.
Left to their own devices.
Yeah, left to their own devices. And I grew up a bit like that and saw some awful violence and stuff like that because of it. And, people now will come out and say, kids these days, everyone's on top of them too much. But actually, like all of the boys that are pushing past Evie on the playground are developing antisocial behaviours, and there's no parent in sight that's actually guiding them better and going, whoa, don't push past her. Like, she was here first, mate.
Yeah.
Imagine what it's like for her, teaching empathy.
Yeah.
But instead, they just go, cool, I saw the other boy just push in front of me. This person's littler than me, or they're a girl. I'll just push past them and I'll get to go on the slide and what I want.
So it's kind of like... I mean, the thing comes to mind is helicopter parenting and people saying, oh, it's so bad that but when you are hovering over your child, you have the ability to teach them really valuable lessons when the time arises.
Yeah, because we've got to remember they get lessons from so many places, like what social learning theory shows us, which is essentially that we role model and imitate. You know what I mean? We watch other people doing it, whether it's in the media or it's the other kid on the playground who gets to go before everyone else, because he just steps in front of everyone else and just gets to go. So kids watch that and go, oh, that kid got what he wants. But the actual higher, like this, essentially very boring. There's 4 different stages. We start with classical conditioning, operant conditioning, social learning theory, which is just spoken about. but skill development, cognitive development is the highest order. And that's how do I teach, a vet to be more assertive? Like boys are very good at being assertive. They're not very good at thinking about the other person in those younger years. So, I need to teach her that, but I've also got to teach her that from a non-aggressive perspective.
I know. So it's like teaching her being assertive, but also being empathetic.
Yeah, but I'm like 41. I struggle with being assertive without being aggressive. I don't know about you guys. Someone does something wrong by you, your back gets up straight away, and you're like,
take it personally, or
yeah, and that's why often for those boys and for us as adults, like emotional regulation is actually the step before that, and you can't teach a kid emotional regulation after it's happened, after the fallout, the conflict, whatever.
Yeah.
Can I just so this is a topic that you're so passionate about, and you just very quickly mentioned your childhood before. Do you mind me asking about your childhood? And you just said that you're a bit like that. You're sort of running around the streets a little bit by yourself. Is that?
Yeah. So I mean, you guys will have a lot of listeners that won't know where I grew up, but I grew up in a place called Frankston, which is like an hour out. Yeah, in Victoria. Like single mum, she raised me and my two brothers. She was working a lot. She worked full time, and then on the weekends and waitressed at the RSL, and a few nights a week. So I was kind of left to my own devices a lot. So yeah, I ran around and saw a lot of that, and was in, I'd get in a lot of fights. Even in my later years, I remember my first ever paediatric job. First time I ever got to work with kids as like a training doctor. I had 2 black eyes. Like the first day that I did that, I had 2 black eyes because I'd been at a cut copy gig, which just throws us back, a band, and I just danced with the wrong person. And so when me and a mate left, we got jumped, and I just got beaten up really badly. And the next week, actually, I started boxing because I was like, so kind of traumatized by it. But that was who I was. Like I'm a little guy. Never in my life have I ever started a fight. I've never walked away from one. Now, that might sound really tough and really strong. It's actually an insecurity in me because I'd rather get beaten up than have to deal with myself after having walked away from conflict.
Why is walking away from conflict so catastrophic for you?
Because that's my idea of masculinity, that what I grew up with was that. My parents separated when I was quite young, but my mum had some pretty, awful relationships, and I still remember a guy who was very violent towards her, and I'd witnessed that. And I'll never in my life forget the moment that I stood up to him, and it was intoxicating because it was, I'm finally standing up to this guy, and I can remember exactly where I was standing, and I was young. Like
how old are we talking?
Probably like 13, 14. Wow. And, thankfully that was a line he wouldn't cross. The biggest predictor of adult mental health service use is developmental trauma. And that's developmental trauma, what I experienced. And now I have a therapist, and, I'm very privileged to be able to access a therapist, but I meet all these kids that are actively experiencing developmental trauma. And so, they've even done studies that if you have a little kid watch someone playing with toys, being rough with one of the toys, like being aggressive and hitting it and all that stuff. And then you take that kid and you put them in another room with different toys. They'll be aggressive and hit the toys and shout at them and all that stuff because they've just witnessed it, and then they do it. Now, I didn't, I watched what happened to my mum and was like, I'm never going to do that myself. But it still had such a big influence on me because I saw that masculinity and aggressiveness was intimidating. And that's what a lot of the boys in our community experience. I meet all these boys that the dads are like proud of them as they get into fights and they can stick up for themselves and they're really tough.
I don't know if you're allowed to do this, but do you have examples from in clinic where you've seen this kind of thing or any stories?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the book I talk about one who still sticks with me where he, is this gorgeous kid that was essentially, which is really common, trying to burn down schools. Because often these kids want to burn the world down because they've been left out. The kid needs love. The kid needs guidance. He needs support. He needs skill development, emotional regulation. But the problem was that kid's dad came back in his life and, got out of prison and was essentially like the kid went back because he was back trying to impress his dad, and be aggressive and hostile and all those things again. And it was beautiful end to that story because I still very rarely, I don't need to see that kid much anymore in clinic because he's doing so well. but he was really vulnerable to becoming one of these men that's out there, using these like primitive skills of aggressiveness and violence and hostility,
It feels like I'm as you guys know, I don't have any kids, but I feel like that would be I would find that really, really challenging if I was a parent and my kid was being like naughty, quote unquote naughty, doing something wrong or hurting someone, or I would find it really hard to not get angry at them. I would find, like, I know intellectually that the right thing to do is show them love, but in the moment, I just know that I would find it really, if I was stressed and to not get angry and to not tell the kid that's wrong, you've done the wrong thing. Like I would find that really, really challenging to walk that line.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've got to remember like every emotion that we experience and the kids experience is valid. And so I get angry sometimes at my daughter, like, and that's okay. I've just got to make sure that it is not detrimental to the behavior that follows it, that I yell at her or scold her and walk away from her, or do you know what I mean? And so that's, and the parent that's getting angry for their kids doing that, that's good, because what they're saying is, I think this kid is better than that. And, but then the second step is what's going on and how do I teach them how to be better? How do I guide them in how to be better? And that's what we need to role model for a lot of the boys coming up, is like, what is healthy masculinity? What does that look like? How do we make sure that kindness and sensitivity is a big part of that?
I mean, are there any like, because I know we've got like Australian of the Year, but I'm sure there are, but we need to be giving out some awards for kindness and compassion.
Yeah, well, I mean, do the three of you think that's something that you work on? Do you work on
kindness
in yourself?
In myself? Yes. I don't know if I actively work on it. I try and lean into it. Yeah. I reckon I've had a complicated relationship with masculinity for my whole life, and I think I've learning to lean into and owning empathy and kindness as a form of masculinity has been something I'm constantly, I guess, working on. Yeah.
Because I see you as a really sensitive, kind guy. Like that's what I instantly connected with you about. And every time I'm in the space with you, I actually feel like that in your
absolutely
presence.
Yeah.
Like you've got this beautiful sensitivity to you, and it's
Well, thank you. I'm very flattered to hear that, because it's certainly what I like to put out into the world, or like to hope I am. But I think as a kid, I think I saw that potentially as a weakness rather than a strength. I think if I look back into my teenage years, especially, like, hopefully we've moved past this, but I'm afraid I don't think we have, that I think a lot of the things that I naturally do, which I think is of empathy and kindness and a certain amount of sort of emotional intuition, I think had always been labelled as kind of feminine attributes. And as a teenager, because I think I had those attributes, I used to sing at assembly, like at school assemblies and stuff. There was a running joke that I was probably gay. And I knew I wasn't, but I would have been fine if I was. But at the time, I was like, I don't like everyone joking about this. But I played footy, and I was pretty big and strong for my age. And the only thing, I wasn't a very skillful footballer, but one thing that I could do, which was really counter to my personality off the field, is that I was actually really good at hurting people and tackling and hitting people. And it was kind of the only role I could play on the field. And people loved it. Like the same guys, joking about me potentially being gay, thought it was awesome, and it was celebrated. And it was finally an attribute that I felt was like manly. And so I leant into it, and I did things on the footy field. Nothing, I mean, probably some pretty dirty stuff by standards of footy, that to hurt people, because it was kind of like a badge that I was like finally masculine. And I played footy till about 20. I stopped playing. I got hit in the head, and I claimed at the time that the reason I was stopping playing footy was because it was like a bit of a shock to get hit in the head, and had a pain in my back, and I was like, oh, this could be a thing. But if I'm being honest, the main reason I stopped is because the only thing I could do was hurt people, and I hated the fact that that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to play footy anymore because I didn't want to be that person and turn up every weekend and be expected to be that guy on the footy field. And I was kind of ready to part with that idea of masculinity. So then, since then, I don't know, I've been trying to work
Why
out.
do you think that was? Because there's something beautiful in your background that means that, and it's probably what's present in you now, that meant that you wanted to move away from that. I wonder if it was a relationship that, or some role modeling, or
Well, role modeling, like it's so counter to our dad. Like our dad would have never, I can't imagine him ever physically or
No, but he really enjoyed that you're that tough person.
Because
loved
he
that
wasn't
so
that.
much. It made him so proud.
Yeah. And then it's interestingly, I look at my youngest boy, August, who's really assertive and he's got that in spades from the get-go. He's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful boy and very good at standing up for himself. And I look at that and I think that's so good because I don't see myself as very assertive or very good at standing up for myself. So I kind of see this in him, and he's a strong little boy, and I see myself going, I'm proud of my tough little boy.
yeah,
The assertive, tough little boy. So it's really, and I think anyone that knows me would think of me as someone who is on a scale of empathetic and sensitive right at one end of it, but I still fall to this idea of like of confusing masculinity, I think.
Yeah, so that comes from your own childhood experiences. It comes from the social norms that sit around all of us. And the hardest thing is like that you talked about the gay bit. And that's like whenever we see, for example, women's rights increase, we see toxic masculinity increase as well because it's a threat to the dominance that we have. And the alpha male crap, like that actually comes from like a primatologist, someone who studied monkeys back in the 90s. And the reason it exists is because it was all about the purpose of the alpha male is I pass on the most genetic makeup to the next generation and I resource guard and I am able to have dominance over any other male that potentially passes on through mating. And obviously none of us care about that anymore, but that came through the literature and became a part of pop culture that we were like alpha males, and the problem is I got a friend who not that long ago, affluent, progressive part of Melbourne was walking down the street and he had homophobic slurs shouted at him. He is gay. And the problem is the reason that's happening is because there's a car full of guys together and their identity is wanting to be a part of that masculine group. And the biggest predictor of whether you will do that or not is what you think others will expect you to do. It's the same as bullying, how we treat women,
How do you
all
mean?
that
Sorry,
stuff.
explain that again.
So if I'm in a group, I'm with you guys,
Yeah.
and something happens to someone, you will hopefully expect me to be nice, to be kind, to be compassionate. So that's part of the reason I'll do it is because I'm with you guys.
So
and
so we're talking about mob mentality, like
yeah, mob mentality. But most of the time, it's the other way. It's like the guys on the construction site watching the woman walk past, and they go, "People are expecting me to catcall her." If they were standing there on their own, they'd never do it. Hopefully,
Yeah, okay.
do you know what I mean? And that's that influence. It's the boys being boys. And, that's the hard thing is that because of you'll be so protective for your son. But a lot of these kids come up and they were like, everyone just reinforced my assertiveness.
It's the Kendrick Lamar's The Art of Peer Pressure. Do you know that song he talks about? He's about to catch his first felony. He's never usually violent, but he's with his homies. That's what he says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something really interesting in that, like my predictor of my behavior is what I expect others expect me to do.
Yeah.
Because certainly I think a little bit of pushback that I heard is that I shouldn't be expected to like be responsible for other men's behavior. Like I'm good. And I certainly had when we talked about doing that episode, Bridge brought it up and my immediate reaction was kind of like, well, I don't know what I'd have to say on that topic because I know it's so wrong. So like what value is there me just sort of saying, well, yeah, it's wrong to hit women. But it's really interesting when you extrapolate from what you're saying before that if it's never vocalized and never spoken about in groups, then there's never a chance to change the expectation of behavior.
Yeah, definitely. Like, we need to talk about this. You guys have got a really amazing privilege of having a really loud voice, but we're not just talking about like obviously, hopefully everyone who's listening to you agrees, but it's the pervasive stuff that happens. Like, we just think, we think women in sports is unusual. We think women in positions of power is unusual. We think like we're not actually really equitable in opportunities that we give. And it's the same as like, whenever we feel like someone's not in part of our in-group, we are vulnerable to excluding them, including subconsciously. And so that's what we do. Like, we want little girls to be pretty. We want boys to be strong, and we want them to be tough and all of those things. And so that's the challenge, is that all of us have a responsibility. And I truly believe it sits with us because we have a greater potential to influence them as well. Like, little boys look up to men. I meet these boys in clinic, these teenage boys. There's one at the moment. He's just like really aggressive and hostile. And this amazing fellow is phenomenal. He's probably a better clinician than I am, but you can't get a word out of him. He just tells her to get stuffed. I walk in the room, he talks to me about all this stuff, and I can do that with him because I have a better ability to influence him because he sees me as similar. And I tell him the stories about me getting into fights. I show him my skateboard injury. I talk about how I got kicked out of school, and then he opens up to me. And so that's what we've got to do. We've got to have these conversations about actually there's lots of different ways to be strong. Actually, being a man is looking after people. Do you know what I mean? And making sure that everyone is inclusion. Inclusion really pisses me off because inclusion comes across as this like, be kind, make sure everyone has a go. But actually, we'll be a stronger society if we give everyone the opportunity to contribute to it. And whether it's the violent boy that's left out or, the little girl who can't possibly be on the sports team or anything like that, we're a weaker community because of it. The extremes is the men's violent stuff. And these little kids at a very early age learn that boys and girls are different. That boys are aggressive, assertive, dominant, valued for those qualities, and girls are there to look after us and care for us.
An example that's coming to mind that, because I'm trying to remember what my experience with violence and aggression was as a boy. But the thing that's coming to mind, which I still see now almost every week, is when I go to the footy and being in the stands, watching the footy, like AFL, and how the men, when there's a big hit, when like on the field and there's a big hit or there's like some sort of fight, the men, not all men, but often the men like, yes, like they get really excited about the aggression, or like if a player in your team hits someone on the other team like really hard, it's rewarded and cheered. And I guess if you're a little boy and you're seeing that and you're seeing your dad or other guys getting excited about the aggression, then you're obviously learning that that's a good thing.
Yeah, we'll think about your experience, Josh. Like,
it wasn't dad, but it was older men when I was younger. Not men, I guess older teenagers. So it was probably, this is going to be a funny reference for you, but it was probably hearing about like someone like Simon Baker.
From The Mentalist.
No, different guy that he went to school with who was really muscly and strong.
Oh.
And when you see that on a pedestal of like, there's a really strong guy, 6 years older than you, who is like celebrated at the school as like this big, strong, tough guy. And I'm in grade 6. And all I've got is that I've had a growth spurt a bit earlier than everyone else. So I am bigger and stronger than everyone else. Then I've finally got something I can latch onto as a social currency that will get me somewhere.
So this guy came to our school in year 12 and he was like massive and he would fight everyone all the time from other schools, and we couldn't believe he was on our team all of a sudden. And he played first 13 footy in the same team as me. And Josh would come and watch us as a 12-year-old, and he was your favourite player. Yeah. I don't think he touched the ball once. He just used to bash people. He's Josh's favourite player.
Wow.
There's two things that's come out of this I really want to ask you about. One is power, because I don't quite understand how. To me, there's a seeking of power that's going on for a lot of men and boys, and I've always felt that if I can really own empathy and kindness and my own sort of what I've come to understand as emotional regulation, and sort of move through life more frictionless than other people, that's a form of power that's kind of untouchable, and I love it, as opposed to a form of power that's quite physically or aggressive or dominating. And I guess, to answer your question, that's the thing that I'm trying to work on. Is power a helpful lens to look through this stuff under, or is it kind of redundant?
So why do we seek power?
I think for self-esteem and self-fulfillment, or to feel like I'm worth something and I mean something.
Yeah. And do we aim for high self-esteem? Being a bit unfair, but you're so good at answering these questions.
I think, I think that's what we say we aim for.
Yeah, so we should aim for secure self-esteem instead of high self-esteem. And secure self-esteem is I can take negative feedback, I can fail. Also, my success is not who I am. So you weren't able to be tough on the footy ground that day, and you got knocked around a bit, and you maybe even lost them the game, but that's okay. You know, you can take that. But also, I see a lot of boys in clinic that their entire identity is tied to their athletic prowess. You know, I've got a gorgeous kid at the moment who's, you know, at a national level athletically. And you know what he does? It's slightly off topic, but it talks about how fragile his self-esteem is. I said to him, like, he's really struggled socially and he's having a lot of like anxiety and stuff. And I was like, what's it like in the playground? Because the playground is Lord of the Flies. You know, the playground is all of us can probably think about vulnerabilities in the playground, because classroom is like this structured, predictable, safe environment, not for all kids, but for a lot of kids. They go out to the playground, Lord of the Flies. I said to this kid, do you have any mates at school? Like, what do you do on lunchtime? He's like, there's one group of kids that if I don't say anything, they'll let me stand there with them. He doesn't have a single friend. So he walks around, and that's how insecure his self-esteem is, that he's like, I'm lucky that I've got these kids. He's like nationally performing in his sport. And, you know, there's this thing that he's like, he actually needs support in building a secure self-esteem, that understanding he deserves better than that, you know, and that's the thing is a lot of the, you know, he's put so much energy into athletic pursuits that it completely it defines him. He injures himself and stops playing. What does he have? You know, he's got an amazing family, but he just struggles with that. And we kind of, the reason that we seek power as well is because it gives us control. And a lot of the time we want control is because it's really unsafe and vulnerable to not have it. These little kids, they want control. These teenagers want control. I saw a kid the other day that is like, once again, kicked out of heaps of schools, and he's at this new one. He's been there a couple of months. And I'm like, do you have any mates? He's like, I don't need mates. And I'm like, what about like when you know, just hanging around school and stuff? He's like, none of the boys will even stare at me, and all the girls just want to be with me. And I'm like, hasn't had mates for years. Like, he's got a learning disability, you know, hasn't seen his dad for, I think, a decade, you know, but he's like, he walks around with such a fragile self-esteem that he's telling himself he's in control so much that every boy doesn't look at him because they're afraid of him, and every girl wants to be with him. Now, he's probably, out of everyone I'm seeing at the moment, he's the one I'm the most worried about when he leaves paediatric care and goes into adult services, that he'll just not show up because he doesn't care about going to therapy, and he'll be vulnerable to just walking around the world feeling like that because he wants control and power. You know?
The other thing that I see a lot now with men is, and in terms of what you said, Billy, about you know, men's identity being tied up with being strong or successful, I feel like there's a big thing now about like being rich and having lots of money. And I think like I know a few guys who their self-esteem is low, but they look up to men who are rich and powerful.
Yeah, and it's often an insecurity. So it's an insecurity. It's also quite an outdated form of masculinity. So it was like, I'm the provider, I'm the breadwinner. The kids that are lost are the most vulnerable to this stuff because they see this guy's got heaps of money, or this guy's really tough and he just tells everyone to get stuffed. And he's my model because I'm out, you know, and these kids get isolated, and all these kids that are running around, breaking into houses, doing all this stuff at the moment, that is because we didn't give them a better path. We didn't give them better role models. We saw them as different to us. And it's the same as like homosexuality or women or people that are different to us. It's a normal thing in childhood, especially in preschool years, to struggle to be able to connect with them. But so many of us get stuck and stay there, especially when our control gets threatened, our power gets threatened, such as when we go through economic crises and things like that. Oh, immigrants are going to come steal our jobs, and so kids are watching all of the society be like that, and they're going, that's how I should be. That's a social norm. Like I put walls up around people who are not like me, and we've got to get better than that. And that's why one of the pathways to healing this is finding common ground. We know bullying strategies and all those things. If we want to have better, behaviors in a community, what we actually have to find is to sit down and have common ground. And that's why storytelling, you guys do it on the podcast, storytelling is the way that we connect and relate to people, because then we find similarities between us, and that's really important.
Can I ask a very specific question?
Yeah, go for it.
And I know it's a very, very complicated issue, but I just wondered if there's something like a general theme you see. So we did a whole episode on when men are violent towards women, and violence can take many forms. It can be physical, it can be emotional. I'm so interested to know what is it that happens, or what has happened to a male that causes him to take that step to be violent towards a woman?
Yeah, usually significant adverse childhood experiences. They have a really low frustration tolerance, which a big part of it is there's two things that make up frustration tolerance. It's emotional regulation, and they've usually no one's shown them that. So they were never taught as a toddler how to regulate their emotions. And you can teach that. I teach that to a vet. She's 3. And I teach that to her almost every day.
How do you teach her that? What do you do?
So yeah, it's mental health first aid, it's co-regulation. First step is always, I make sure my emotions are in check first.
Right.
And sometimes I really struggle with that because she's refusing to get in the car. She's, throwing a meal I've made across the room, whatever. And so a lot of the work is in that. And then I just get down to her level physically. And then I've learnt, and every single kid is different. That's why I never believe anyone is like, this is the one way. She has to come to me. I have to get down, let her come to me. If I go to her, she'll run away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I bring her to me. Well, we've gotten to the point now where we're so good at it that she knows what's going to happen, and we both sit there and do these deep breathing exercises. And it's quite funny because sometimes it happens out on the street. And it's like me and her, I'm like down on my knees, like just looking at her, and open body, slow, low tone of my voice. And I'm just like, all right, let's do some breaths. And I have to validate that experience she's having, even if it's really pissed me off that she's 3 and she's having this. So what happens if we don't do that with kids, especially boys, who are more likely to be hyperactive and impulsive from a very young age? We've got good data on that. Then what happens is they're a man who hasn't been taught emotional regulation. They're so quick to action, and they have learnt that violence is a way to do it through role modeling, through media. They weren't given a better path. The best way to stop someone doing something, whether it's a 3-year-old or a 30-year-old who's doing that, is to teach them how to do something better. A lot of the time we say, stop doing that, but we're not actually teaching that man or this little kid how to do that. Now, all my work is with kids, and the reason I do that is because there's always hope. Even the 18-year-old who's, about to put in juvenile detention, I'm in a very privileged position that thanks to like 14 years of full-time university and 20 years of doing this stuff, I've got a huge bank of stuff that I can use once I've connected with him and I've got his trust. So that's what I do. And I want to catch that man who's doing what you're talking about before he does that, because we can do that. We can develop the skills, and we know what emotional regulation is. Like, we know how to do that and build it in people.
So typically it could be a neglected child. I'm talking about boys really here who when they get distressed, like any child would, the parents are either not there or they just get really angry at them and potentially use violence themselves to stop the behaviour.
Yeah. Do you know what else they do? They get angry and they walk away.
Right.
And the kid's left on their own to figure it out. And often escalating is how I get them back.
Yeah, right.
I become even more aggressive. I become even more violent.
That's how they'll come back.
Instead of saying,
You mean the kid gets even worse, so the parent will come back? Yeah.
and the kid learns, that's what gets support. Throwing a chair across the classroom, smashing a window, whatever, hitting my brother again, all of that stuff.
That's what gets attention.
Yeah. And so that's called a negative coercion cycle, and they just kind of get caught up in it. But you're right, like adverse childhood experiences, which are abuse, sexual, physical, emotional, neglect, emotional and physical, and household dysfunction, parental mental illness, violence in the home, maternal, parental substance abuse, all of that stuff.
So these are the predictors. These are the things
so these are the biggest predictors, of this adverse childhood experiences. 1 in 5 kids in Australia has 3 or more of those in their childhood. Yeah.
Okay.
So 1 in 32 kids in this country has active involvement from child protection. And if we don't do better, they'll become those men.
I'm interested to know what role pornography, like it's so accessible and such a universal thing for boys or men, I should say, well, both. What role does that play, and can that be very damaging as well?
Yeah, that can be hugely damaging because we know that when we survey all across the world, actually, teenagers, a lot of them, including girls, have had exposure to pornography, and often unintentionally, at a young age because of an older sibling or someone else who's, exposed them to that. And that can be really traumatizing to see that, especially, some of the awful content that's out there. And we didn't have to worry about this when we were growing up. It was literally behind a curtain, in movie store, in video stores and stuff like that. But now it's like the click of a button on a phone. The really big problem with it is it can be often traumatizing to the viewer, but it's also that what we talk about, that social learning theory, doesn't just come from watching someone else doing something directly. So, I watch Ryan be rude to a barista, and then I'm like, oh, that's okay to do that because I've seen someone do it. But you can see it through media formats as well. And so the media format that objectifies women or, shows that this is how you treat them physically when you're being intimate with them is really, really vulnerable, because then that's kind of what gets taught as the social norm. And the hardest bit about that thing is that parents don't often have an awareness of it. So this is where you have to be really proactive. You have to be really proactive in actually having open conversations. And regarding anything, whether it's moral development, how we treat women and all that stuff, we need to guide kids towards it. We don't tell them this is how to be. We say, this is how I am and this is why. I'm really respectful of everyone else. This is what consent in all aspects of my relationship with your mum is like. This is how I know that someone is appreciating the way that I be with them. And that includes when you're being intimate with them. This is how we really respect each other. This is how we know these are hard boundaries. This is a hard boundary for me. I never, ever, ever hurt anyone, and including when I'm being intimate with them and things like that. And, little boys who don't have that role modeling, especially from men, it's just really, really scary. And the awful thing is that women have held the weight of this. Gina Davis has done this amazing work in equity in media. I used Thelma and Louise. I still cry at the end of that movie every time. I've watched it 40 times. But I used it to demonstrate mental health first aid. But she's amazing because she's done so much advocacy in this space for women in media. And it's a really important thing that we see powerful women in media. We see women that are valued, not women that are degraded or women that are seen as objects. So it's actually not just pornography. That's the extreme of it. But what we've talked about this whole time is role modeling what healthy behaviors are, what is empathy, what is respect, what is understanding another's perspective, what that might feel like to be treated like that, including physically, including, intimately, things like that. Those are conversations that we have to have proactively, not wait, because your child might not come to you and say, hey, I've just seen pornography and I've just seen this man do this awful thing to this woman and it looked like that was what I'm meant to do when I'm now intimate with a woman in the future. And you also have to make sure you create really open spaces and practice them coming to you and opening up conversations that are safe.
And we really can't underestimate how accessible it is, and at such a young age. You might know the exact research this was, but I read somewhere that research or surveys done in Australia showed that 100% of 14-year-old boys in Australia have seen violent pornography, and 80% of 14-year-old girls have seen violent pornography. And just to your point there, for, I think about a 14-year-old girl seeing that and thinking that's what's going to happen to me or that's what's expected of me to put up with. But then a boy also at a vulnerable point going, I don't really know what I'm meant to do, but okay, look like that's what I do.
Yeah.
It's a really frightening space.
So all of us, including me, including you guys, how do you role model healthy intimacy with your partner in front of your kids?
How do you do that?
Yeah, you show them how much you love them, physically affectionate. You know, what does it look like? How do I know that your mum is, just being, cuddling and kissing and all that stuff? Like, we often do that stuff behind closed doors. And then if the only imagery that they see is awful stuff, then they go, well, I've never seen healthy. You know what I mean? So remembering intimacy is not just sex. It's like just intimately hugging you when I got here. Do you know what I mean? And that's positive role modeling of, two men being intimate with each other, connecting physically and all of that stuff. And then, cool, I've seen that thousands of times. I've seen violent pornography once and it felt really uncomfortable and wrong because of how much I've had healthy intimacy and affection role modeled to me.
Yeah.
Men are hopeless at it. We don't do it. I don't know about you. I've got to be better with Annalise. Like, I adore her and I should make sure that, appropriate levels of affection are role modeled towards her in front of my kids.
But what you say makes so much sense, like just inundating your kids with examples of positive, intimate connection.
Yeah.
Absolutely inundating them so that when they see that, it's like, that seems weird to me.
Yeah,
That
that's
is
out
not.
of place.
Because at 14, you're so impressionable. And I know for me, it's like at that age, it's like the terror of having to have a sexual experience is like, I don't know what to do. So you're sort of desperately seeking out, like, you can't ask, well, maybe you can, but I didn't feel comfortable to ask any friends or older men. It's like, what is the right thing to do? You're sort of like guessing and hoping. And then for me, it's like wanting to, when you do have a sexual experience, it's just hoping that you come across like you know what you're doing. Like you should be an expert at it at 14 or 15.
Your first go at it.
Yeah, but we should be really understanding that we need to earn that relationship and that trust and that practice with kids when they're really young. That it's okay for you to come to me, especially something awkward as puberty, and you're getting this big hormonal surge, and you're finding yourself attracted to either same sex or different sex or whatever, and I will guide you because teenage years is really about practicing being an adult, but you need adults to guide you in that. Because it'll be mid-20s before you actually get the cognitive brain capacity to be able to succeed at it and have all the skills. So we need to be the safety net. And it doesn't mean that if you've got a teenager that you, for whatever reason, your own mental illness, all your own stresses as a parent, that you haven't been able to build that connection, you can still build it now just by start being sensitive, responsive, predictable. I'm here non-judgmentally. I'll support you. My role is that I care about you, what matters to you. And then after time, they might go, hey, I'm really struggling with this component of like what's happening at school or how I feel about myself or how I feel about other people or some content that I've seen. That's probably the most important thing that we do because we want them to come to us and see us as a source of support. We don't want to be on top of them.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The security guard who bailed me up outside the supermarket said to me, I saw your thing you did on the project because we were on the project talking about this after we did the episode. And he said, it's such a waste of time. And he goes, men are always going to be violent. That's the way we are. That's why we're born. And I was like, I don't think anyone's ever looked at a child the moment they're born and gone, this one's going to be violent or this one's toxic.
But people would have said that was what I was going to become. So, and I might tell you, I'll just get emotional telling you. I'll tell you the reason I didn't. But it might be the last thing I'll be able to say in the episode because I get emotional about the story. But security guards are a great example. Think about, a long time ago for me, maybe not so long ago for you, mate, going clubbing.
I'm flattered that you looked at me. When you said that.
Think about going clubbing and you're with a bunch of boys and they won't let you in, the security guard. Now, there's two different ways those security guards will approach that and they've both learnt them in childhood. One is I'm going to be more aggressive and hostile. I'm going to physically intimidate you and tell you you're not allowed in here. And you think about when you experience that, you got your back up. Like I got my back up all the time and, they would have been internally laughing, probably outwardly laughing as well when I was a teenager and in my early 20s going, who did this guy think he is that he's going to intimidate me to get in here? But that's what I saw, hostility, dominance, power struggle, like what you talked about. There's the other form though, isn't there? There's the security guard that's like, hey, I'm so sorry, it's so annoying. And they connect with you and they're calm and they say, mate, I'm so sorry you can't come in. It's just like my boss would give me a hard time if I let this many boys in. It's really frustrating. Hey, do you know what you can do? Is if you cruise over to this other place, because they're connecting, they're understanding, they're validating the experience you have instead of just coming out hostile.
Yeah.
And that's why I disagree with the path is set. It's because so much of what we're role modeling, and I don't know that person you bumped into, but potentially is their own insecurity and their own lack of conflict resolution and emotional regulation means that when they're met with a challenge, especially a confrontation from another male, they assert their dominance again.
So all the things you mentioned before, those predictors of what could lead to a boy becoming quite violent as a male, all those things, I mean, that's out of that child's control. I mean, all this stuff's out of the child's control, but dealt with in the right way by a role model or by a positive adult relationship, male relationship, or it could be
the beautiful thing about this stuff is there are, there's evidence around positive childhood experiences, and boys need these arguably more than girls. And those things are, having two non-parental adults that take a genuine interest in me. And that's where, so sports can be really hard because sports and clubs can actually perpetuate macho attitudes of hide your feelings, exclude women, and non-typical men, especially gay men, they can't be part of this club. So they perpetuate that. But they can actually be amazing for girls in terms of teaching them how to be assertive, and they can be amazing for boys in showing them, that I genuinely care about you. That's the best thing coaches do, is that I unconditionally support you and care about who you are, not teach you how to kick a ball. The second one is having at least one adult in my home that protects me. Being able to talk to my family about my feelings, participating in community traditions. Our culture protects us, and this is why people who come from a different culture and don't have any connection to it are more vulnerable because they're not a part of the footy culture. That's really protective, what I mean, for a lot of people because it helps you connect and identify with yourself. Feeling a part of the school community and having friends that really care about me. Those are the factors that will protect kids from having these experiences, but also heal those that have had them. And I spend more time in clinic trying to find those things for kids than I do making diagnoses or writing scripts for medication. Sometimes kids need it to be able to regulate their impulses or deal with their anxiety or whatever it is, but there's no skill development in it. And so that's what we actually need, but we need to connect with people first. And these boys that have no one that connects with them, they'll run around and then they'll find another dysfunctional boy who is also talking down to women, breaking into cars, whatever. And they're like, I just want to belong. And if belonging means that I also break into cars and I might go to jail and my parents will be furious when they find out about it. And that's the kid I was. That's why I got kicked out of school. So I just wanted to belong and I was trying to impress people by being assertive and having a go at authority figures and all that stuff, like all of the guys that I came up with. It's just how we were. And like you, mate, on the footy field, that's what I saw as me being good enough. And I was really lucky that, that wasn't the way that I stayed, but it wasn't because there was something better about me than anyone else.
For the non-parental adults that care, was it two or more?
Two, yeah.
Can that take the form of teachers?
Definitely. So my PhD is on this. My PhD is how to build the capacity of educators to identify and support kids with emotional difficulties. In 6 months, I delivered 45 sessions to primary schools. And the reason I did that is because my bit's the easy bit, knowing where the skill gap is, what's the cause. The hardest bit in all of this is trust. And teachers build trust, especially with the most vulnerable kids, better than any. That's why they are the most important profession in our community. They will spend more time with kids often than their parents will. In a day, they'll spend more time with the most worrying kid I will spend with in a year. So they spend hours and hours. And the best thing that they do is actually show kids that they're unconditionally valued in that community. They take a genuine interest in them. They tap them on the shoulder on the playground and say, hi, I care about you. And the kid that's really struggling, the tiniest thing they need to hear about is when they're in trouble. What those kids need more than anything is, regardless of what you've done, I'm here and you matter to me. And the best teachers I've ever met are the ones that prioritize that over everything else. And kids who do not feel safe and valued will not get anywhere near learning anything. And educators taught me that.
Awesome.
Yeah, you said before how it's like this privilege that you have to be able to catch kids before they turn into these violent men. But you had this really troubled childhood and you had a tough childhood. Was there someone who like caught you?
Yeah, there's a few things that were for me. Like when I got kicked out of school, I was too afraid to tell my mum. She was like, you know, she's amazing. She's like a feminist and worked all these jobs and all this stuff, but she was very strict. And she only found out because I was actually catching a different bus one day. And she's like, what's that about? And I was like, whoops.
How long were you gone before she found out?
A while. So I got kicked out in year 11 in term 3. And my dad actually was part of my life then. And I kind of, you know, said to him, hey, like, and he went round with me to all these schools and was able to be the parent. And all of them were like, yeah, cool. We've got a spot. We just got to do some background stuff. We'll chat to you. And I reckon 6 or 7 schools called up and said, actually, we don't have a spot because they spoke to my old school. I went to the final one before I was going to have to go to TAFE and sat down with this man who was an authority figure. And we had this conversation about, yeah, we need a new school and all this stuff. And I just connected with this guy and he's like, cool, at the end of it, wrapping up. And he's like, you know, well, we've got to do some paperwork and stuff. And we were like, we've heard that 7 times and then there's no spot. He's like, no, there's a spot. You're starting here in term 4. And I went there and it was really funny because I still was against authority figures and all this stuff. And they were just like, yeah, you come to class. This is when stuff's due. If you don't hand it in, you just get a 0. We're not going to ride you about it. And I had no one to fight. Like I had no authority figures to fight. I still had lots of people to physically fight and still got into lots of physical fights, but I had no authority figure to fight.
That was pushing you, back against you.
That was pushing me. But it's an interesting story. I've been banging on so much about this, but it's I don't know if you guys have something that you think that's what I aim for in terms of who you are. And we, you know, probably all of us have that quite subconsciously, but I think it's an important thing for us to reflect on, but also to role model for the kids in our lives. And you'll have an opportunity as well, mate, to influence people, even though you don't have kids, because people will be watching you and there'll be lots of little kids that look up to you, that interact with you. And yeah, my story for that is that, you know, neither of my parents finished high school. And then, you know, my 2 brothers are actually way smarter than me, but I have a different thing to them. But I still remember the day that I got the letter to say that I got into med school, and it came, and I remember like just wanting to show my mum. My girlfriend at the time was with me and my brothers and all that stuff, and I got the letter and I just like buzzed past all of them and showed it to my mum because I knew how much it would mean to her. And she's like really proud. But from that, literally that day, she told everyone in the community I was a doctor. From the day I got the letter, hadn't done the first day. So I was a doctor, and I would have to keep correcting people and being like, no, actually I haven't even started at school yet. But, you know, she was so proud. So that continued. First year into med school, I got a call from her and she's like, I've just found out I've got a brain tumor. I've got 18 months to live. And, you know, I was devastated, of course.
Sorry, so your mum?
Yeah, my mum found out she had, you know, early 50s, that she had a terminal brain tumor. And so she was like still telling all this story and becoming quite confused. So she'd tell people like, he's a doctor and all this stuff. And I was like halfway through med school. She somehow survived right until the end of med school. And towards the end of med school, I got a phone call like in the morning from my brother saying the doctors have said you need to come now. Like, you know, I was interstate. And so I was like, yeah, cool. But I couldn't get anyone to cover my shift. And so I had to finish my shift. Someone sped me to the airport, told my older brother, I was like, I'm about to get on the plane. And so I was like, sweet, I got on the plane. I landed and it's like a 45-minute drive to the hospital. And my mum's sisters had come over from Ireland to be with her for that last bit. And when I landed, I called my brother and I was like, I'm here. I'll be there in 45 minutes. And he's like, yeah, sweet. And I knew she died while I was on the plane. Just the way he answered, he didn't tell me. And so I got there and, you know, it's an awful experience, but my aunt said the last thing I said to her was, because I knew I wasn't going to make it, was, you must be so proud of him because he's going to be a doctor. And my mum was like, I'm so proud of him because he's a good person.
Mm.
And I put effort into that every single day and fail at it almost every single day. But those are the North Stars we should have for ourselves and our kids. But we do. It's like money or physicality or being dominant. And we just, you guys do a beautiful thing in that space of just being vulnerable. And how do we tell those stories and be genuinely vulnerable and like lift kids into that direction and guide them there and say it's okay to fail, it's okay to cry. It's okay to have these big emotions, especially boys. It's like, yeah, it's such an important part. And I think that, what I do in clinic is get the privilege to meet these kids, but I'm probably selfishly looking for myself as a kid. And I will never be able to help my mum now, but I meet mums like that all the time. And, I've got actual skills to help with that stuff now. And like, this is what it's all about. It's all about why is this little boy struggling with that? How do we help him with that and guide him to better? How do we role model in society, not just action heroes and not just athletic people, but men that are kind, men that are sensitive, men that can be vulnerable, men that value people different to them, that are curious about, different aspects of culture and, things that people are into. And that's, and I hope that I never sound like I'm really good at it. I stuff it up all the time, but I try really hard at it. I try really hard at that for myself, but I also know that my kids are watching me and they'll watch what I do more than they'll listen to what I say. And so that's what I think is really important. I think a lot of us like talk to kids about like treat people really well. And then we get in a car and we go, this arsehole just cut me off. And we get aggressive and honk at them and then cut them off and all that stuff. And they don't hear treat people well. They watch and say, no, you're dominant. You're aggressive. That's what, you're on the footy field and you hurt people. That's what we praise. And so all of us have got to work on that, but especially men that have privileged voices.
Billy, just so special to chat to you again. It's such a privilege to listen to you talk about a topic that you know so much about and a topic that you're so passionate about it. Your mum would have been so incredibly proud, not just because you're a doctor, because you are such a great person.
Oh, thanks, man. I tried to be.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. It's lovely to be back.
Thanks, Billy.